We are live.
Okay, Senate Appropriations, February 5th. We are still working through, or no, we are still working through the budget adjustment. But right now we're going to be talking with the Commissioner of Finance about the 26 budget and also one issue from the CPA. So Commissioner's joining us from the sick ward. Appreciate you making the effort. You're not feeling well.
Well, we're something going around. I don't know what it is, but thanks for thanks for understanding. I just didn't think you guys wanted me in the room today.
No, we don't. Not today. Any other day, you're welcome. So what would you like to start with, Commissioner? The question about the insurance fund or the FY26 stuff?
Well, I'm happy to speak about the medical benefits or medical insurance fund if people had questions on that. Does that work?
Yeah, let's start there and then go to FY26.
So if you look in the most recent ACFR, the annual comprehensive financial report that I know that all of you guys read nightly, you'll notice that the deficit in the medical insurance fund for the end of our most recent fiscal year, fiscal 24, was about $36 million. That has worsened quite substantially, and it was probably not 5 years ago when that fund was either in surplus or, basically at a stable level. So we have issues there, and I think predominantly the issue is a familiar one. The state self-insures. This is our self-insurance fund, and like other insurance companies, we've been struggling with the cost of delivering healthcare through, again, I think familiar things. I mean, the pharmacy costs and utilization has been high. So this has run that fund into a deficit. And I want to make certain you all know this is not from any subjective movement on our part. We speak in the fall with the Department of Human Resources, and they provide, or they bring with them, an actuary, and the actuary tells us what he or she believes we should contribute to the fund in terms of premiums, and we do that. So I think really the kind of the bottom line is, I think there's been a rather consistent and dramatic underestimation of the amount of premiums that need to be collected to handle healthcare costs over next year. So anyway, that's kind of the reason for this, in that, a simple one: we've been under contributing and overutilizing, and we will address this, but our kind of addressing this is twofold. The first is, you will note in the budget adjustment, there was an $18.5 million general fund transfer into the medical insurance fund. The second method is by increasing premiums. And premiums for the employer, in this case, the state of Vermont, and the employee, in this case, state employees, including me, premiums went up 15% for the first paycheck in January. And that follows a substantial increase last year in January. So every year, premiums have been going up, and they are again. But so we, by collecting premiums essentially in excess of what we think will be used for claims. We're trying to work off the deficit. However, we elected not to entirely allocate out the deficit in premiums. And that's why you see an $18.5 million one-time transfer from the general fund into the medical insurance fund.
So between the 15% premium increase and the 18 million, you feel that that'll balance the fund for next fiscal year?
That is our hope. I mean, in past years, I've said yes, but I'm kind of tired of getting it wrong in that regard. There's been a very difficult time estimating, but yes, that's our intentions. And keep in mind, the 18.5 million transfer is unusual. That is not something we've done before. Typically, the medical insurance fund is an internal service fund, kind of like fee for space, the state liability fund, and all the other internal service funds. And so it's allocated out to departments based on their headcount. And that is advantageous. By that, I mean, there's different funding sources that those departments pull down. It's not all general fund. In fact, it's kind of a rule of thumb that in the total payroll, about 40% is general fund. 60% is other fund, and of that, I would say most of that is federal funds. There's some T fund, there's some special funds, but there's a fairly good dollop of federal funds. So when we allocate out costs to employees and departments, we can pull down other funding sources. It puts less pressure on general fund. But the reason we're kind of transferring this deficit from general fund is really, first of all, because it's quite large and we would have to increase premiums quite dramatically to make that up. And the cost to employees would be substantial. The state, okay, we'll come up with the money. You just talk to your commissioner and he'll find the money somewhere. But it also 20%, keep in mind, it's an 80-20 share. So employees pay 20%, the state pays 80%. So whatever, increase that the state absorbs, employees will too. So we just thought that would be a little bit challenging, again, based on the fact that they got a 15% premium bump in January. We didn't want to pile on. But again, we could have. And to the extent that this is not agreed to by the General Assembly, we will factor it into premiums in the following years. But anyway, so that's kind of the short story on this.
Okay, that's helpful. It's good to have the graph and the tables for me to understand it better.
Yeah.
I thought maybe the deficit had been building for more years, but I see it's just been the last 2 years. Any other questions?
Just for additional context, Mr. Chair, we had a surplus in this fund, again, like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And at one point, it was something in the order of $50 or $60 million. And that, oddly enough, was worrying because the federal government that contributes to this fund through, when we have employees that have federal funding sources, they don't want to be contributing to building up a surplus in a special fund.
Yeah.
So we would get notes from them saying, aren't you contributing too much? I mean, anyway, just to let you know, I mean, this thing has been a bit of a seesaw, but it's not a great story.
Okay. Senator Norris has a question.
Yes, Commissioner. Is it my understanding that, got a bug in my throat here, that the employees have already received a 15% increase in their premium and we're trying to avoid another 15% plus the 18.5 million? Did I hear you wrong on that, or?
No, and I don't know what the exact premium increase would be if we didn't put this $18.5 million transfer in, but it would be, I'm guessing, comparable. I mean, we have a $36 million deficit. So, I mean, we would have to clean that up and, provide for, medical costs and claims that are rising. So it wouldn't surprise me, but I don't have exact numbers as to how much it would make in premiums. But it would
But
be,
they've had an increase already though, right?
yes, 15% as of January. And I think it was 10 or 11% last January. So
your chart says 14.4% last January.
I'm sorry.
No, I guess 24 was 15%. 23 was 14%.
Yeah.
So,
Yep,
That's huge.
it's
So it's
decided.
not a great story.
right, it starts in January. It's on the calendar year, not the fiscal year.
Yeah, it's a little awkward in that our plan is a calendar year plan, whereas our state fiscal year is, well, July to June. So actually in the fiscal 26 budget that we submit to you, the last 6 months of the calendar year are in there. So the 15% increase is, 6 months in there. And then we made an estimate of, I believe, a 7% increase for the next calendar year. That may prove to be too optimistic or not. We don't know. But so yes, the kind of calendar year, state fiscal year is a little bit awkward.
Okay. Okay, makes sense to me. Any other questions about the surplus in there or the deficit in the medical service fund? There are lots of.
Maybe I'll just defer to.
No, go ahead.
as well. It just, like, the story that this graph tells is, it just feels really dire. And, that how long can this trajectory continue? And I know that it's wrapped up in like the bigger picture of, more than just the state of Vermont's issues. So I don't have any solutions. I'm just saying, like, you gotta turn it around somehow.
And this graph isn't any much different than the premiums it costs for the teachers.
Right, exactly.
So all healthcare costs.
Yeah, so I'll just repeat what I said the other day, and that we are in healthcare cost crisis right now. And that's why Health and Welfare is taking it up and working collaboratively with the House Healthcare Committee. We need to do something. It's an emergency. We can't keep putting more money into the system and expect us to survive. We really can't. It'll be overwhelming soon. Just impossible.
Right.
So we are working on it, and
Good.
I know the administration is interested, I hope. I didn't hear much in the governor's budget about healthcare, but maybe now with the dire straits we're in, we'll be able to put something together.
Well, you'll notice a couple of things, Senator Lyons, in the budget. May not have made the speech, but there are a couple of things of note in that regard.
Yeah, good.
Okay, speaking of the budget, how do you want to present this information, Commissioner?
All right. Typically what I do is I go over so-called general fund overview, which is in the little budget book, which is the document that I dropped on your desk, actually the day of the budget. And the overview begins on page 14. If at least on, I don't have the bound copy, but I think it's the same pagination. Is that sources? Is that what you're?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So typically what I do is I go through this page, the following page that gives you the uses for, how we're going to use the money. And then there's one final page on one times that we could go through or not, as you please. But if you look at the sources, a lot of this should be familiar for those that have looked at budgets before. We begin with the e-board forecast for revenue. This incorporates the January emergency board. And maybe a little bit unusual in that it's quite a bit smaller this year. You notice there's additional property transfer tax just below that. In past, that number has been a bit larger because we've given flat appropriations to Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, as well as the regional and municipal planning commissions. This year, we gave them their statutory amounts. So this number is quite a bit lower. The reason there's anything there at all is because you'll recall there's a housing bond outstanding, $2.5 million of debt service on that housing bond. And that $1.5 million comes from VHCB's amount, and another $1 million comes from the clean water surcharge amount that goes to the Clean Water Fund. So that's the additional property transfer tax. In addition, there's about $500,000 in there that goes to servicing the current use program, the use value appraisal program. The tax gets a 1.5% allotment for the property transfer tax. They only need about half of that. So we sweep the balance into the general fund. So that's the additional $3 million. There's also quite a few direct applications, reversions, and other transfers. This is, again, should be familiar. There's nothing of big note here. However, I did want to point to, you'll note that in the budget adjustment, we kind of filled a deficit in the liquor fund, and we also dropped their direct application, their kind of net income swept into the general fund in FY26. I mentioned we would. This 14 million was in the 20 to 21 million dollar field last year and past 3 or 4 years. They simply have been generating lower net income. And
Commissioner, can you remind me the difference between a direct application and a transfer?
So transfers go from fund to fund. They go from general fund to transportation fund, or general fund to debt service fund. Direct app goes into the general fund from an enterprise or from a department that's generating income.
Okay, so like liquor control or finance and regulation.
That's correct. Yep.
Some enterprises that are annually giving money to the general fund or direct apps.
Yeah, these are typical. This is what we draw for. Actually, the one addition here is sports wagering. That I mean that was there the past couple of years, but that was new. The first new for quite a while. I would also mention something that is relatively recent is we are no longer receiving a direct app from the Secretary of State. They used to send $2 to $3 million from the Secretary of State's fund, and they no longer do. They've had some IT projects that have used up some of their extra cash.
This is the first year it's been zero, or it's been?
I think last year was the first year. I may want to correct that, but I think it was last year was the first year.
So,
Yes.
so those are the licensing fees they're going to pay for the computer systems?
Sorry?
But the Secretary.
Oh. Yeah, I think it's among other things. They've had their HAVA system, licensing, the new business portal. They've had a number of systems that they're working on. They would be better to talk
My
about.
only question about that is that they're for specific projects. They'll have a beginning and the end, and they soon will go back to the regular transfer that they make.
That's my hope.
Well, we can ask them when they come in for their budget.
Yeah.
They charge them. They have a lot of licensing fees.
Yeah.
They do. Their revenues have done very well, actually. So there's just under 103 million of direct apps and transfers. There's a small reversion from the legislature, 121,000, which is also somewhat unusual. So our total sources from the emergency board, from a little bit of property transfer, and from the direct absent transfers is 2.509 billion. And that's what we bring to bear in terms of base sources. Subtracting from that, I know that you'll be familiar through speech and otherwise, the governor had some tax initiatives. The 5 tax initiatives here, I don't think any of them will be unfamiliar based on past years. You know, you guys are well aware. I think most budgets have had a military pension income tax exemption. We last year had asked for a $2 million increase from $3 million to $5 million in the downtown and village center tax credit, which didn't make it to across the finish line. So we're asking for that increase again this year. And then the child tax credit, EITC, and Social Security threshold increase, I think again are reasonably familiar.
Senator Burns has a question. Commissioner.
Afternoon, Adam. I'm just wondering on child tax credit and expansion of EITC, and understandably, nobody wants to say for sure what will happen in the future, but is the intention to keep those steady as we move forward, or is this a one-time thing?
No, these are base. The intention is to keep this going. That's why we show them, yeah, up in base.
Great. Just what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Senator Norman.
What is the EITC?
EITC is the Earned Income Tax Credit.
Okay, thank you.
So we deduct those from our available base revenue. And then the only other addition is one-time funds, which are substantially the funds that additional revenues that we anticipate from the January e-board meeting when they upgraded the revenue forecast, as well as funds that we've carried forward from the BAA, which is, I mean, quite substantial, $131 million. I guess in the past 3 or 4 years, that hasn't seemed like a lot of money, but you know, historically, that's a lot of money for one time. So the total that we're bringing to bear, base and one time, is 2.625 of sources. Are there questions on that?
Doesn't look like it.
All right, onward. If you flip the page, you will see how we put that money to work. Regardless of the amount of money, it just seems awfully easy to put it to work. Too easy, really. So we begin, and again, this is a familiar way that we've done it over the years. So we begin with last year's base appropriations, which are from Act 113, 2.11 billion. And then we add Pay Act, which is, you know, what we use to cover the collective bargaining agreement for our employees. There are 2 base adjustments. One, if you guys recall, the Office of Health Equity, remember when that was set up, they were charged with finding themselves a forever home and you know, where they wanted to be, actually. And ultimately they decided they wanted to be you know, at the Department of Health. But the one-time amount was given to the Secretary of Administration. So here we're shifting that amount from Secretary of Administration into BDH, and we're baking it into their base. But we are adjusting their base upward by 250 to account for that. Similarly, or not similarly, but there's also an adjustment for the next $5 million to DOC's base. And this was when we were kind of cycling ARPA funds through corrections. There's a $5 million general fund that we replaced with ARPA funds, and we extracted the general fund. So we lowered the corrections base by $5 million. Here we are putting it back. When we did that, we told them they would be held harmless. So this is our holding harmless. And then the final correction is, so in last year's budget, the pension plus payment, which was specifically put into the base, or intended to be in the base, was, I think, made as a contingency appropriation in B1102 last year. I forget the context behind that, but I think it was, well, I won't speculate, but that was put into a contingency appropriation, despite the fact that it's supposed to be a base appropriation. So this year, we moved it into the base, and we adjusted last year's base to account for that. So it wasn't just a giant increase this year. You'll recall that this year it goes from 12 million to 15 million, where it stays at 15 for until we are 90% funded. So it's going to be that way for a while. So those are the base adjustments, and that kind of starts us out at 2.16 billion. And then there are a rather beefy menu of current service pressures that in total add up to about a 6.1% variance to the base starting point. So the pressures that you see here will, just to keep the lights on, just to do what we're doing this year relative to last year, will be about a 6.1% increase, $133 million. And I think, again, a lot of these will be reasonably familiar. Salaries and wages.
Commissioner, what's the difference between the salary and wages and the pay act?
So every year we bake in the previous year's pay act into our base.
Okay.
That's what you see there. So that pay act 30 million next year will be part of the 43 million.
Okay.
It's baked into the base. But that also is actually quite substantial and includes a number of side arrangements with the corrections, with state police. I don't know who else, perhaps mental health. But that's, again, that's unusually large increase in salaries. There's also, as we've spoken not long ago, about a 20 million or $19.8 million increase in health benefits, the employer contribution. And that is based on the fact that we're anticipating, well, we know we have a 15% increase for the latter 6 months of the calendar year, first 6 months of the fiscal year 26. And then we are projecting another 7% increase next January. So the combination of those two are included in that $19.8 million. Similarly, you'll notice a increase in retirement contributions. And that's for BSERS, Vermont State Employees Retirement System. And that is based on the actuarially determined contribution that they ask us for, and it goes up. So those are really the three major contributions. So if well over half. And then you see, I don't know if we need to go through, all of these. There are some pressures in internal service funds, some increase in property tax assistance, through tax. Remember the 12 million up top that we baked into the base. There's another 3 million on top of that. Remember, it was going to go up in steps, up to 15 million of additional contribution to the pension plan. So there's another 3 million added to the 12 to get to 15 million, and it will be 15 million until the pension plans are 90% funded. So we, not to be too cynical, but I think we can anticipate that'll be that way for a bit. So you see that both the VSTRs and VSERs, and then you see in retired teachers healthcare B515, that's just the additional OPEB contribution we're making that we put in there. Keep in mind that for teachers, there's also in the education fund, they pay what's called the normal cost of their pensions, and the general fund pays the unfunded liability cost. So the teachers has a fairly beefy unfunded liability, just like the state employees. And so the unfunded liability is in the general fund. And the normal cost, what they pay for, annually for each employee, that's in the ed fund. But the unfunded liability in the general fund is now about 10% of our general fund. It's a fairly significant amount. So the next two, I think you probably can see with CCFAP, there's two changes there. One is, and this should be familiar from the budget adjustment, similar forces going on. There's about a $3.5 million caseload savings and a $19 million reduction in general fund and shift to special fund for payment. So what this is saying is that the total appropriation to CCFAP, both special fund and general fund, the DCF is saying is too high. So they're reducing their general fund amount by 19 million, and they are relying upon what they believe will be a surplus in the special fund.
Yes, Senator Bruce has a question.
Commissioner, honestly, this is the place where I'm most disturbed by the budget. I understand the caseload idea, although we just brought the payroll tax online and just offered the increased benefit within the last year. So it seems to me that caseload, if DCF and others are properly rolling it out, it should be increasing. But it seems like we're projecting a decrease here, and we're sort of unilaterally moving almost $20 million out of the transfer. I guess one thing that bothers me about it is that it seems to view the status quo as okay, that we won't try to grow the amount of people that are getting it, or, for instance, use overages to smooth the cliff out for wealthier recipients. So I'm wondering how open the administration is to discussing those movements, which seem at cross purposes with that program, which admittedly we passed and the governor vetoed, but we did override. It's now law. My understanding is that the agencies administering it are very proud of it. I'd like it to be going forward and growing and providing a stronger benefit, but it seems like here we're locking in to the budget a kind of pattern of reducing. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to that.
Well, and first of all, these numbers from DCF were not kind of extracted with at the tip of a sword. I mean, they believe that these are going to be real savings. So it's not that they're, I mean, this is a benefit program. This is not the kind of, I mean, to your point, I mean, it's law. We're aware of that. So we're executing the program as we're told to. And, you know, we promoted it, and I don't know. But, you know, obviously DCF would be the better person to speak to, but I can assure you these are not, you know, kind of pie in the sky numbers. These are real numbers that they're projecting will pan out. And, you know, to the extent that the legislature wants to change the program or expand the program, yes, absolutely. The administration would love to engage. We just need to remember that this is now kind of a component of the budget. So we would, you know, but yeah.
Understood. And I, in my thinking about it, I've tried to be more sympathetic to DCF and the administration's position on the BAA, where we're moving significant amounts of money into BAA, because that seems to me to be the reality at the moment. But this seems as though it is looking to put into practice a reduction in the 50 million, and then budgeting for that reduction, spending the money elsewhere. When I would personally prefer that 50 million to be a durable amount. So I take your encouragement that the administration would like to work together. So hopefully we can be talking about that as we go forward in the next couple of months, because that seems to me a place where we're maybe coming at it seemingly at cross purposes.
Understood. And I'll give DCF a heads up that something that you had asked for, Senator.
Thank you.
Then the next item here is kind of standard, kind of in some ways back to healthcare. So you have a larger state match requirement as the program is growing. And that's the 30 million general fund, meaning the total growth in the program is probably in the 90 million range this year. And also you have a smattering of higher ed increases. Basically, they got a 3% increase in each of the State University, UVM, and VSAC. So that's pretty much all our current services pressures. The interesting thing is Pay Act this year actually went down 2.8 million from last year, which was elevated. You see the $30 million number up at top. This year's Pay Act is going to be about 27.5 million. So there was actually, which is unusual, but there's actually a small amount of savings from that. And that kind of gives you, you know, kind of where we are, just to, again, keep the lights on. It's, again, a little over 6% up, which is, well, it's substantial. And then moving down the page, you'll notice there are the initiatives that are baked into the budget. And I won't go over each one of these with a fine-tooth comb, but just to introduce them. Actually, the better way to get to the initiatives is through the language, particularly on the one time. But kind of there's about $34.5 million of initiatives. Far and away, the largest one is, I don't know if I call it an initiative as much as just a kind of a swap from the T fund to the general fund, which I know a number of people sitting around the table are quite familiar with. We are asking to eliminate what's known as the JTOC transfer, the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee transfer. Every year for, I don't know, actually, Senator Westman, you may know when this thing was started, but I don't remember. It was certainly before I came here, but I'm going to say back in the Dean administration, maybe?
1991.
Yeah, okay. So there's transfer from the T fund to the general fund. Back then, the T fund was flush, the general fund wasn't. And over time, that has been reduced as the T fund has been more stressed. And so it's now, and has been for a number of years, at 20.25 million. And so this year we're saying, look, let's finally put a fork in it and get rid of that transfer and, kind of go back to the way it should be. Using the T fund for transportation and the general fund for more general. So, but that is nonetheless, it's on a statewide basis net neutral, but on the general fund basis, it's $20 million up. The next, in terms of amount, is up at the very top, ACCD. We're taking two programs, the Manufactured Home Improvement and Repair Program and the VHIP program. We are baking those into base. They've been one-time funded for a number of years, and we're saying, I think we just need to have a certain amount of money that we can count on, and that we can use day in, day out. They've been both very successful programs for us, and we think it's time to recognize that and put it into base. And also, we have a Quebec representative office, I believe in Montreal or outside of Montreal, that has been very good for generating buzz and generating leads for the state of Vermont. So we'd like to also keep that as a base initiative. Below that, we are kind of trying to stand up a recovery campus that will be a pilot program that probably in the Northeast Kingdom. We don't have a place for it yet, but we're thinking the Kingdom. And we're also looking to keep a pilot that we had started, gosh, maybe Senator Lyons, you remember. I mean, the kind of urgent care, able to deliver mental health needs. I think that was last year or the year before that was started, but evidently it's been very successful.
I think it was last year. I'm trying to remember. Yeah. So I do have a question about this. This is a general fund match for the global commitment. Was there any discussion? It seems that obviously having recovery campus, we're talking about a recovery campus, so we're trying to emulate what's going on with Jenna's Promise.
Right.
Yeah, and so the question I have is, I haven't looked recently at the recommendations from the settlement fund, but is there anything in the settlement fund that would take the pressure off of general fund? So that's something we could look at, maybe. I don't know what the commissioner, has he sent me the letter yet? I don't know. I don't think so.
Are you talking which settlement fund?
The opioid settlement fund.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the big one that we have, and because this seems like a good fit for that. And we did talk about it last year when we were developing the recovery bill, that we don't get a report. Yeah, that doesn't come back to us till next fall, but it's not something we can answer right here, but I need to look at what the recommendations are for the opioid settlement fund this year, and then think about whether or not it fits with this. Could save us.
I do think, Senator Lyons, that the opioid recommendations are going to be traveling in a separate bill.
Yes, they are. Yeah, they are. I just
So you
haven't seen
should
it.
see those.
I don't know what's there.
I mean, so, okay, I will note that.
Thank you.
And then the alternatives to emergency beds is kind of a clunky way of saying, I think that we've have added, and I think it's been considered quite successful, some urgent care, mental health urgent care at the urgent care places. I think in Newport, they've got one urgent care center that does just that, and they've now moved to 24/7 due to the need. So it's something that we're trying to roll out in a greater way. Right below there, DCF, that's acknowledging that we have expenses in the shelters, and this is for operational expenses for keeping these things stood up and ongoing. There's the famous CAFO, Combined Animal Feeding Permitting Transition, which is something that DEC, I think, is assuming a greater role in relative to ag. But I can't say much more than that.
That's the water quality.
I think so.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
And then further on, we're looking to add one more site, DOC, for pretrial expansion. I don't think we've chosen the site yet, but again, I think this is something that we need to continue to roll out. I think that would also include a position or two to help execute. We're putting a radio equipment kind of base funding to be able to replace radios on a regular kind of every 3 years type thing, as opposed to do it all at once at high expense. So we're within DPS factoring in a kind of a radio funding into their base. There's also within DPS, we're standing up the school safety center, which will be one FTE within DPS, again, to work with schools over safety protocols and the like. And there's also a small $5,000 appropriation for a hazard mitigation grants manager. That's small because it's, I think, 90% matched by federal government. So that's only a small commitment there. There's also the Green Mountain Care Board is gearing up for the kind of the next phase of healthcare reform. So they're adding 3 positions there. I will acknowledge they asked for quite a few more, but we figured we were comfortable starting with 3 positions, and I think they understand that.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, I think that having 3 positions is a good start. Obviously, there's more that's needed for what our committee and others will, and the House committee will be working on for 2025 healthcare reform. So the 3 positions are a start. It might be best to consider additional positions, B, additional funding within the board for the work that they are probably need to do in order to reduce the premium costs that you were talking about earlier, and other possible budgeting issues, going forward. So I would just ask that you keep that open for conversation. As I look down below at some of the large one-time expenditures, there might be a way to accomplish everything that we need for healthcare reform.
You'll also, in terms of one-time expenditures, you'll note the kind of bridge payments. I don't know if that's the terminology we use, but the bridge payments that will get us from the end of the ACO OneCare to the beginning of Ahead, which is the new model. So there's a 1-year bridge to the providers that have become accustomed to elevated payments for various procedures and the like that they've received through OneCare and no longer will. But I guess the point is that Green Mountain Care Board is in need of gearing up for the Ahead model and kind of understanding it and tracking it and the like. And so, and I would acknowledge, Senator, that they had asked for more positions. So I guess, we'll see where they come. The other thing I would note here is you'll notice when you read through the language section of this budget that there are no positions that we're asking to be created, even though there are a number of positions that we're funding. And that is because we are going to be sweeping position, using the position pool into which we sweep long-term vacancies that are no longer filled, and then we reclassify them as new positions. That is how we're going to be doing it here. So Green Mountain Care Board is going to go to the position pool committee and apply for their 3 positions, but they will be funded. They'll have the funding, which is always the first question we ask when it comes to position pool. Creating new positions, how are they funded? So.
We have another question, Commissioner, from Senator Norris.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, not a tough question, Commissioner. How many positions do they have presently, just out of curiosity?
Green Mountain Care Board?
Yes.
About 30 to 35. Yeah.
It's pretty big. Doesn't compare with what the PUC has, which is much larger. That's interesting. You don't know that until you start looking. Good question.
Pretty big.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then the last one, in terms of base initiatives is VDH. And, honestly here, they're just trying to bulk up on areas of need. I don't know if it's any more complicated than that. They'll be able to, tell you in what areas, but this is what we're calling the substance use continuum of care. They've had a lot of need across the spectrum, and they're just trying to engage, and they're trying to add resources where they need it. So here too, there are some positions involved, and this is the funding for those positions. So those are the main base initiatives there, totaling 34 million. Although again, 20 million of that is really a funding switch from the T fund to the general fund. But when you add the 15 million of tax initiatives to the 34 million of base appropriations, you have about 50 million of base initiatives in total. There are quite a bit more one-time initiatives and transfers, and you see that below. The one-time initiatives are on the page following this one, and we can go over if you so please, Mr. Chair, or we can do that later. But there's a total of just under 100 million of one-time general fund appropriations in B 1100.
Can I?
Yeah, we have a question.
Yeah.
Adam, I'm looking at the PCB.
Yeah.
Funding one time, 9.52. And I'm very glad to see that. I'm just wondering, when we talked about this last year, there had been a move in the House to pause PCB testing. That didn't go through. We understood that the administration was going to slow testing, but continue it. Can you offer us any insight into what's been going on in that way?
They've continued to test. I mean, they're continuing to test and mitigate. So this is actually this 9.52 million is supplemented by a $480,000 appropriation in the one-time list to BDH. And that's for one position, and for various operational expenses. So they continue to move, and
I'm sorry, did you say BDH?
BDH, Vermont Department of Health, sorry.
BD, got it.
Yeah. So, and that's for, gosh, I think I even know that it's for, I thought I knew it. Well, maybe not. Anyway, it's for one position at BDH and then some operational costs. So.
Okay, but am I right that the administration thinks that the total, which is 10, will cover the potential remediation costs for the coming year?
For the coming year, I think that's reasonable to say yes. Certainly not
Yeah.
for anything more than that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Adam.
Just above the PCBs, if you move to the education fund, I don't think we have to say much more about that. That 77.2 is our estimate of what it would take to stabilize, on average, statewide property tax. And that would also build on some small bottom line funds in the ed fund. So that, we believe, is what it will require to do that. And then right below it, there's a transfer into the CIT, the Computer Information Technology Fund, which is kind of an old name for the ADS internal service fund that they use. And we are next year going to roll out a new billing methodology for the Agency of Digital Services. And this new methodology will move them into the 21st century from the 20th century in terms of how we bill for them. And one problem with that is their SLA bills that you probably remember from the budget adjustment. Those are demand-driven bills, predominantly for data usage and Microsoft products. Those are billed in arrears, meaning kind of like when the guy that comes to mow your lawn, he shows up and he sends you a bill after he mows it and you pay it. But that's not the way we budget in the state. We budget for prospective cost. For FY26, for example, we're budgeting for what we believe will be our costs in 26. And because we're human beings and we make mistakes, we have the budget adjustment to go. So with ADS, that's what we're doing. We're going to be moving them into a prospective billing structure, and also putting quite a bit more into their allocation, meaning their internal service funding, and less into their demand charges. That's kind of a long way of saying this $15 million is to clear up one particular problem. If you're billing in arrears and then you switch to prospective billing, you still have that 1 year when you've got to pay the bill. So FY25, or pardon me, in FY26, you'll have to pay the bills for FY25 and FY26. So I'm not sure I explain that well, but we're trying to clear up what will be an arrears billing, a double billing really, for ADS, where they kind of move forward 1 year and then they move to prospective billing.
We have
Anyway,
a question. Commissioner Watson.
So just to make sure I understand, so we would anticipate that for the FY27 budget, for example, that would not appear there because we would have
Right.
taken care of the double.
that's correct. We just thought that if we did it in one fell swoop, it would be pretty rugged. And, you know, I choose to say with a slight smile that this 15 million isn't actually new money. It's money that would be billed anyway. Just we're advancing that 1 year. So it's just bringing to present what would be billed out next year.
Should help with the VA next year, not have all those SLA changes that we had this year.
That's what we're hoping. And, you know, I say that with a slight smile because with IT, it's always, I mean, there's a fair amount of fluidity. I don't think quite as much as healthcare, but they're up there. But anyway, this is our attempt to kind of move them into a new building. And Secretary Riley Hughes has been very outspoken on this. I think you would, she can explain what she's trying to do in this regard. But since she took over as secretary a year ago, she's kind of wanted to kind of update their billing methodology.
Okay.
And then you see we've spoken about PCB. So those are the one-time amounts, and which again is over $200 million, which is a lot. Again, in past couple of years, it doesn't seem like a lot because it seems like we've had a fair amount of $150, $200 million or more appropriations, but historically that's a lot. So total initiatives based on one time or 236, and I would add to that the tax initiatives that we put up in sources because we were deducting from revenue sources, and it's really $250 million of initiatives in this.
Okay.
And then finally, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And then down below that, just moving down to transfers and reserves. Many of these will be familiar. There are a couple of bizarre exceptions, I might say. The Cannabis Regulation Fund, that actually is an incoming, that's why it's in parentheses. So it's not a reduction, it's actually an increase in general fund. And that's because in 25, just like in 24, the excise tax on cannabis is being directed into this fund as opposed to being paid out to the general fund and to the substance misuse fund. And so that was done in 24 and 25 when the Cannabis Control Board was kind of gearing up and running up a fairly beefy amount of expenses, and they were exceeding what was thought to be their revenue that was set aside to pay for their expenses. So instead, they redirected all the excise tax into this special fund, and they directed me at the end of, and in FY26, that all goes away and the regular excise tax payments will happen. But they directed me to take any excess in the Cannabis Regulation Fund at the end of 25 and send 70% of it to the general fund and 30% of it to the Substance Misuse and Prevention Fund. So this 5.9 million is our estimate of what will be left over, 70% of which. So again, that's probably not going to appear again next year. And then you have our debt service. The one thing I'd mention on debt service, that 81 million, that was 73 million last. So, our debt service is moving up, and there's nothing insidious about that. It's we've got more debt outstanding, but that's almost 11% increase. The,
No, just go ahead. Oh, no, Senator Watson.
Sorry, can you just tell us a little bit about why that, I'm just thinking about the money from the VA that we put towards paying down debt. Anyway, could you say a little bit more about that?
about the 81 million.
Yeah.
So that's just actually, the number itself is just a simple calculation the treasurer does to figure out what principal and interest payments combined will be. But the growth in that has to do with debt outstanding. It's as simple as that. And we had an issuance last summer. We're anticipating an issuance, I believe, this coming summer. And which isn't unusual. I think the state generally goes to market every year. But the amount of debt outstanding is growing, and interest rates are slightly higher than they have been.
How much is that of that is interest rates? Because our interest rates are double what they were 3 years ago.
I'd say half or more. That would be a better question for the treasurer to answer. But yes, back in the day, we used to be able to issue debt for, sub 3%. I forget, 2 3/4, or it was
I'm 6.
kind of mind blowing. And that now it's higher. It's not. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember when actually people paid 7-8% for a mortgage, and it was considered normal. But relative to past years, yes, it's gone up a bit. So anyway, that's yeah.
The treasurer at one point was given that $20 million we talked about yesterday
Yes.
to pay off some of these
Right.
bonds.
Okay.
But that's that $14 million that was paid
Right.
back that we were.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. The next one down is actually, dare I say so, gets to a construct that we developed with actually the previous treasurer, Beth Pierce, to try to reduce the amount of debt we have outstanding by moving to a PAYGO system or at least a partial PAYGO system, whereby instead of borrowing for capital needs, we would be paying up front for capital needs. And we created a construct that would enable that to happen by taking 4% of prior year's appropriations. And why 4%? Because when we looked back over, I think we looked back 10 years, we were paying about 4% of the general fund for debt service. So we thought, okay, so let's lock that in. We'll say we'll pay 4% for debt service, but it doesn't have to be to pay bonds. It can be to either pay interest and coupons or interest and principal on bonds, or it could be to set aside cash to pay for projects that are, stuff that we want to do. So that was the construct we set up, and that's what you see, the 14.88 million of appropriations. And the idea was that we would set aside in cash 4% of last year's appropriations minus what we're paying for debt service. So if we're paying this 81 million, for example, on this year, if we take 4%, subtract 81 million, we would come out with 14.88 million of money to send into the cash fund that can be used for capital investments. It's just not to be used, or doesn't need to be used to borrow. We can pay up front. And the idea was to try to spend more cash to invest and less borrowing. So this 4% is this year's payment on that.
So this is also sometimes called the cash fund or capital cash fund?
Yes. Yeah, we call it the cash fund for short. It's got a, if I might delicately say, I don't think the legislative council or whomever named this fund did it so that it would roll off the tongue. It's actually got a long name. Capital Infrastructure and something else fund. But anyway, the next transfer is the annual tax transfer to pay for V-Tax. There's a transfer from the general fund, and there's also a transfer from the ed fund. They both use V-Tax, and this is how they pay for it. The $185,000 from Fish and Wildlife, that is unusual. And that is a transfer into their fund to act really as a bridge payment. And that they've got a restructuring going on. They've kind of been hit by what I would call a perfect storm of declining special fund revenues into their permitting, their hunting and fishing fund that has coincided with an increase in the costs of doing business, the same, kind of struggles that we've had to pay medical benefits and retirement contributions and all the other stuff for a department that is not exclusively, but predominantly specially funded. It puts a lot of pressure on their special funds, which is true for many other departments too, but they're particularly hard hit because they've had declining revenues in Fish and Wildlife. So they have launched a restructuring study, or they're looking very carefully at how they can financially restructure. And this is a bridge payment to get them through the year without having to RIF anyone, without having to make any major changes that they still may want to do in the following year or two once they've figured it out. But, this is giving them some breathing room so they can be thoughtful and about what they're doing. I am quite certain they would be very happy to come in and talk to you about how that's working.
Okay.
But that's why you see a small $185,000 transfer to the Fish and Wildlife Fund. That's a rarity. We have our reserve contributions in the next few lines. It turns out that we're actually reducing the amount that we need to put in the budget stabilization reserve because this year's appropriations, or I should say, last year's FY25 appropriation, it's 5% of the prior year's appropriation. So FY25 appropriation is actually slightly lower than FY24. So we're actually unreserving about 1.4 million from the stabilization reserve. Similarly, this human services caseload reserve, that is also formulaic, and that's based on what they call IBNR, incurred but not reported claims. And as they go down or up, we contribute or reduce the amount in that reserve. And I guess IBNR claims have actually gone down this year relative to last year. I can't explain how that is, but that is the case.
I have a question.
Okay, Senator Watson.
I think I have two questions about both of those lines. One is just thinking about it as it's so we're unreserving. I guess it's really like a technical, like how does this work kind of question. Like if we're unreserving money from a reserve, then I'm hearing that as like it's going to something. So what is it going to?
It's not really unreserving. It was lowering the amount that we're putting in the reserve compared to last year. These are changes.
Okay, right. Yes. Okay.
So because of the appropriation 25 was less, then we're due 5% of that, less than it was.
So we're not reserving as much.
Correct. Right.
Okay. I think that clears it up for me, actually. Thanks. Checks both
That was
boxes.
easy. And then the last one is the 2753 reserve. That's familiar for the 27th payroll or 53rd week of Medicaid that we contribute to every year according, again, to a somewhat formulaic amount. So those are our transfers and reserves. And that totals 96 million. When you add those to the other one-time amounts, you get just under 300 million of one-time transfers and reserves.
So the 2753, we do it every year, but we call it a one time.
We didn't used to do it every year. We got,
We used to wait every 5 years.
yeah, we got whacked, and we said, well, we better not do that anymore. And that wasn't that long ago.
Doesn't that thing seem like it should be? We do it every year. That's how
I
it's
think it
been done.
was 2016, I want to say, then
Yeah.
we had a 53rd week and a 27th week, both of them the same. They're not always the same year,
Yeah.
but I think that one was, and it blew a hole in the general fund. It was really most unpleasant.
Yeah, it was unpleasant.
So I
Is it-
think this was enlightened, actually.
2016 doesn't seem like that long ago.
This is 5.7 more than the price. This is a change. So it's a big dollar number if you have to do it every,
Yeah.
every 5 or 7 years.
You're much better to be on top of it.
Yeah. Okay.
So that kind of gives you a very quick run through of the kind of the structure, the sources and uses of the general fund. If you like, I can just quickly point out some of the one-time appropriations, or we can do that later. Up to you.
If there's anyone, like if anybody on the committee has a question on any of them, but if there's a couple you want to point out, we have a couple more minutes.
All right. There's, I think, well, there's quite a few of them. I mean, by far, I can just go down by size. I mean, you see emergency housing, that's the general assistance appropriation. By the way, this is on page 16.
Yeah.
So a third of that, or 30% of it is for emergency housing. That is intended to carry us through next year. When you add that to the 7.5 million of base general assistance, you come out to be roughly 38 million of general assistance for FY26.
Do you know how that compares to what our investment is this year? I'm trying to remember.
It's quite a bit lower.
Yeah.
I think this year, I want to say is going to be 47-ish.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Senator Brennan.
Adam, how far does that carry us through the year?
Yes, through the year. This is intended along again with a general fund base appropriation in general assistance DCF of 7.5 million. It's intended to carry us through the year.
And this is with the same rules now, so.
That's correct.
The next fiscal year, so this would take us from July to the winter months, and then through the winter month changes, and again from April to June under the different non-winter month conditions.
That's correct. This is current law.
Mm-hmm.
Current law. The next two largest appropriations and were VHFA. Essentially, both of those are targeted at developers to provide financial incentives for them to, either fix up or develop middle income, either rental or home ownership homes. Both of those are existing VHFA programs. Right above there, though, 9.1 million is for a new program that would, instead of focusing on homes, would focus on infrastructure, wastewater,
Oh, got it.
and the like. So that's through the Vermont Bond Bank. I did want to point out, you heard the governor in his speech mention that he was going to be sending to AOE an appropriation to help them gear up for an education transformation. There's the $4 million appropriation right in the middle of the page that does just that. Senator Lyons, I mentioned earlier, the Blueprint and SAF programs, that's the general fund bridge amount that is matched with federal funds. The total amount is $10.8 million.
That's good. It'll be good to look and see what that is over and above what we're currently doing. Just FYI, the blueprint has been cited as something really critical and important for us to invest in the near and the long-term future to reduce healthcare costs.
Commissioner, the DCF shelter capacity expansion, is that a similar 2 million that we had this year? It's like as needed, it's like emergency, or is this shelter capacity permanent shelter capacity expansion?
This is to open up more shelter space is what it is. You'll notice in base DCF has a 3-point-something million for operating those shelters that are, but no, this is for more shelter capacity.
So like for community providers to get more beds. Basically.
Yep.
It's not the state-run like emergency shelters that they're doing this year.
Oh, that I can't answer. I don't know. I don't want to give you wrong information.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know.
Yeah.
Someplace between the two of us.
Ours.
okay.
We'll figure it
Anything else? Or does anybody else look at this list? We're going to have these agencies in to talk about these things, so we'll have other times. But
All right.
give the commissioner a hard time while he's sick. This is your opportunity.
Well, this is kind of gives you a quick breeze through, kind of pointing out the highlights.
Yes, appreciate it. Senator Lyons.
I just have a quick question. We'll hear from Ag, the Agency of Ag, but do you know what the CAFO permitting transition involves? Okay, that's okay. We can ask that when they're in.
That actually might be a good DEC question as well as Ag.
Yeah.
You know, confined animal feeding operations. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think there's been some pressure from the Clean Water Board as well as from the EPA to get our ducks in a row, so to speak, on that. So I think this is an attempt to spend time and resources to do that. So.
Okay. Well, thanks for your time, Commissioner. We'll let you go back to healing yourself.
Go back to bed.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot. We'll be in touch.
All right. See you guys.
Yes. So we'll adjourn, go on break, come back. I assume, is it Vermont Arts Council coming in?
Yes, and she's outside.
Okay. Oh, we'll just